Hare Krishna, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition or episode of the Hare Krishna Project podcast. This is episode number 80. We have finally made it to our 80th episode. I'm trying to think about some jokes around the number 80, and I can't think. I used to go and play bingo as a kid with my nan, and I don't think 80 was any jokes around that number. But we are at finally number 80. This is absolutely fantastic. A big thank you to those of you who are tuning in on YouTube or on Facebook. If you're watching this on YouTube, please do hit that all important subscribe button so you can keep updated about future podcasts or future films that the Hare Krishna Project produces. If you're watching it on Facebook, please do like or follow the Hare Krishna Project page. So you can keep updated about what we're doing. As you know, just a bit of a kind of sell for the Hare Krishna Project. We've just launched our brand new website, the harekrishnaproject.org.uk, where you can find out lots of information about what we're doing. We are, I don't like this word because it sounds religious. We are a preaching initiative. We're keen to share the teachings of Prabhupada, of other acharyas, of Krishna consciousness with ordinary everyday people. So please do check out the website. So episode number 80, I'm delighted to welcome our guest this week, Rasesvari Dasi. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Radha. It's very, very nice to be here. Thank you.
Or is it just Dasi? Is it Devi Dasi or Dasi?
Actually, I can't answer that. I don't really know. I was given the name as an 7-year-old. I was given the name as a 7-year-old. So I was born Jasmine Rasa. And I was given the name as a 7-year-old, and unfortunately all evidences of the name, because it was given by letter, got lost in a flood. So presumably it's Rasesvari Dasi, because it's a name for Srimati Radhika.
Yeah.
And therefore not Devi. I don't actually use Devi.
Yeah, I learned that not all mats use the name Devi, and I learned that about a year ago. But anyway, it's wonderful to have you with us. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Let's start with a nice, easy question. Tell us a bit about you and where you're from.
So actually today is my lunar birthday. Today, officially, I was born 39 years ago, 2 days after Janmashtami, and
wow.
My dad kindly reminded me of that today. He sent me a beautiful message saying, first comes Sri Janmashtami Mahamahotsav, and then we celebrate the arrival of Srila Prabhupada, and then, my dear, you were allowed to come into the world. So that was a really nice message to get from him this morning.
It's really very convenient. It's very convenient of your parents to just happen to have you the day after Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja. I think that's really cool, actually.
Little influence. They had some influence on that a little bit, but yeah. Okay. It definitely makes it easy to remember my lunar birthday. So yeah, I was born in Melbourne, Australia. At the time, so Melbourne Mahaprabhu Mandir is a huge ISKCON temple in the heart of Melbourne, not right directly in the city, but very illustrious. Srila Prabhupada was there. There's many recordings of him being there. And yeah, so my parents, that was where they lived at the time that I was born. And I spent most of my childhood, however, in Moolumbar, which is the ISKCON community of New Govardhan. And then there's also Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat has a temple there called Sri Govindadam. And my Gurudev, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj, we have a temple there also at Banner Street. And don't ask me what the name is right now. My memory, Krishna, memory and forgetfulness. Yeah, so I was born in Melbourne, and I spent the first 5 years of my life between Melbourne, North Sydney Temple, and the Gold Coast and a few other areas. And then my family, my parents, my father and my mother had separated. My mother and my stepfather settled on the Gold Coast, where they had a few more children. And that's where I spent a lot of my youth. So more or less from 4 until about 14, I spent most of my time there.
So your parents are devotees, or they were devotees before you were born. what's my question? My question is, I mean, how long have they been around in the movement? I mean,
Okay, good
yeah.
question. So both my parents are immigrants. My mom's from Vienna, Austria. My father is from London. 3-year-old, and I don't actually know how my father met the devotees. I know it happened around 13 or 14. He became a vegetarian from reading a book called The Vegetarian Primer and doing some, spiritual soul seeking. But he didn't really, get more involved in the temple until later on. And then he and my mother met when they were 16 and 17 or 16 and 18 or something like that at a party in Melbourne, and maintained, contact. And later, around, I guess, 2 or 3 years before my birth, my dad finally had been preaching to my mom for a long time about Krishna consciousness and about Bhagavad Gita. And my mom finally went to Melbourne, Mahaprabhu Mandir, to the Melbourne temple for Govardhan Puja, I believe. And that must have been about probably the year before I was born. So probably sometime in 1983, maybe as early as 1982, but I can't confirm that. So neither of them met Srila Prabhupada. They were, a part of the devotee movement and heavily part of preaching. My dad was on the pick a lot, doing paintings and whatever. Around the time that Bhavananda was in, doing his thing. And my stepfather, Javier Hari, who he was known as then, who's actually was a very, very big Kirtaniya. He and my mom got together in 85, I think, so a year after I was born. And so I had both the association, my father and my stepfather, to really support me. My mom, of course, as well. Yeah.
So usually a question I ask the guests now is, how did you meet the devotees? How did you discover Krishna consciousness? But you were sounds like you were born into the movement. So yeah. So tell me, what was it like growing up as a Hare Krishna child in Australia in the 1980s and first half of the 90s?
I've just got goosebumps as you asked this question. It was the word that comes to mind is discombobulating, because there was an idealism in everything that I was exposed to. There was a charm, there was a beauty, there was a sumptuous gorgeousness in everything that I experienced as a child. Some of my earliest memories of Govinda Maripurshan and the smell of incense and heavy bells ringing and the chamra, and Srila Prabhupada's voice. Even though I never met him, I didn't really associate the fact that Srila Prabhupada had departed until I was already well into my 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age. I didn't believe him to be any to the Murti when I saw him, and I didn't believe his Murti to be different to my parents. So there was that. And then there was participation in all the rest of life. So going to ordinary schools and having grandparents and step-grandparents who were not in Krishna consciousness at all. There was the juxtaposition of going to festivals and getting kajal put on and wearing tilak and getting up the next day and going to school and having kajal on and getting yelled at from teachers. And in my public school, it was discombobulating. It was fantasiful, like so much fantasy and so much beauty, and yet very surreal and sometimes incredibly jarring, if I'm really honest. Because there was this wonder as a child coming into these spaces and feeling absolutely enchanted, and then leaving those spaces and feeling completely confused. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what's the definition of discombobulating? Is that the word?
Yeah, discombobulating.
And I'm sorry that you kind of got goosebumps when I asked that question. You hear a lot about children being raised not just in Hare Krishna, but in lots of religious traditions, and it affects people in different ways, doesn't it, based on their experiences and stuff. So did you, I mean, and let's talk a bit about your teenage years. Did you at any point rebel against that? As usually when we become a teenager, people might rebel against the will of their parents. They start doing things. What were your teenage years like in the Hare Krishna movement?
Oh gosh, interesting. So my parents are rebels. They've always been rebels, and even in Krishna consciousness, although they rebelled against normal society, even within Krishna consciousness, both of them have a distinct persona, separate from one another, obviously, but a distinct persona of no holds barred. I'm trying not to say bad words on here. My mum is, 100% who she is, and she doesn't care what you think. My father is 100% who he is, and he doesn't really care what you think. And so my rebellion was a little different to normal rebellion. We stayed in Moolumbar area until I was 14, and then we moved to Melbourne. And that was the first time that I'd been away from the devotee community. That was the first time that, it wasn't normal and expected that we'd go to the temple at least every Sunday, and also on big tattva days, So actually I rebelled by packing my sari into my school bag and going to school, and then getting dressed and finding the nearest train station or bus station and going to the temple, with or without my parents. So my mum, had 3 other children, and she and my stepfather were very busy maintaining our material life, and we lived 2 hours from the temple, or an hour and a half, 2 hours from the temple. So I was just really, really lucky that so many people saw my enthusiasm, and there were different devotees who would drive an hour out of their way to deliver me home after a long program, middle of the night. That was my rebellion. However, whilst I was doing all that, as I went into university, I was working in 2 restaurants, not vegetarian restaurants. I was at uni, I was drinking, and I'd squeeze in Sunday program in between all of that. I'd actually leave my shift at one of the restaurants for 2 hours to go to the temple to serve prasad, to have darshan of the deities. I used to serve with my father. It was always his service, as he'd serve the hundreds of devotees on Sunday, the Sunday program at Melbourne Temple. And then I'd go back to my material life, because I didn't want to leave Krishna consciousness in any way, shape or form, but I was lacking peerdom. I was lacking friendships. And at that particular time, there weren't that many, in my age group participating regularly. They were either, they'd been moved to different parts of the world, or a few of the girls had already gone on some of the big bus tours in America. And I was actually not very well liked among the girls, because I didn't go to Gurukul. And a lot of the girls, most of the girls did. And they were very, very cliquey, the Gurukul girls. So, I rebelled by packing my sari into my pack, and then between temple programs, going and drinking a lot. Yeah, radical honesty, like I said.
You mentioned we had some kind of email messenger exchanges before this podcast today. You talked about your parents, I think, being disciples or initiated by Srila Govinda Maharaj.
Yeah.
Tell me a bit about how that happened. So for anyone, I assume we're referring to Govinda Maharaj, the successor to Srila Shida Maharaj.
Yeah.
So tell us a bit about that and how it happened, not how it, you know what I mean, in terms of how did that fit in with the kind of ISKCON narrative in Australia? Yeah,
that was very interesting. So without going too much into history, in the late 80s in Australia, there was, big changes in leadership, so-called fall downs, and lots of different things going on. The Gurukul project at New Gowran had already started, and at the same time, around that time, there was a few other things happening. The stuff in Russia with Mr. Gorbachev was happening. Sri Prahlad, who was one of the Gurukul boys, a bit older than me, my mother and my stepfather actually produced that album. My mom did the artwork for if people remember, "Hey, Mr. Gorbachev, please let our friends free." So it was a very dynamic period in time. And my father constantly went to all different sanghas. He would also go to, I can't think of what they're called. They're called the Australian School of Meditation, I think. And they're supposedly an offshoot from ISKCON. But essentially, wherever I would be with my father, he would take me to whatever temple was possible, even sometimes Sikh temples. At the same time, in my family with my mother and my stepfather, we would even go to Taoist temples. Anywhere where there was a kind of spirituality being practiced, we would go. But specifically how we sort of all came under the protection of Srila Bhakti Sundar Govinda Maharaj is that after years of desiring more spiritual protection and more spiritual guidance, my parents were invited to attend a program, and my mum just sort of said yes very, very early, packed us all in the car. I think my little sister was tiny. So she's 7 years out my junior. So I was 6.5, 7. She was tiny. Not yet months old, maybe 2 or 3 months old. And the message that I remember, and I have some details from my mother about this as well, is that she was told relatively late in the night, left relatively early in the morning, and was told it was his last day or two to attend. So I remember we arrived at a place called Terranora on this beautiful property. And I remember this surreal feeling of, oh, it's like home, as in ISKCON, but it's not like home, as in it's not huge and curated, and there's no marble, and it's very impromptu. There were, rigged up tents and marquees and prayer flags, and it was relatively cool. I remember dew piling in the nasturtium flowers and leaves, and my mum and my stepfather met Srila Govinda Maharaj and very quickly took initiation from him within 2 or 3 days. And beyond that, I only remember, the people I came in contact with around that time. So elders and a few children. I remember feeling like this feels more wholesome. That's how I felt at the time, because I'd been in different political climates in the Australian development. And actually prior to that, so this was in 1991, and actually prior to that, in 1989, my father had been in the association of a few disciples of Gaur Govinda Maharaj, and they'd actually started a preaching program with a preaching center in a place called Labrador. So I'd already began to feel a bit of a difference between, the remnants of Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON and, when an acharya is actually still physically present. And, the place at Labrador was, really rotting, and yet it still had so much rust. So much beauty. So my parents, my mother and my stepfather took initiation in 1991, and we were constantly going to programs. We ended up, in that year, we moved about 150 kilometers south to be in that same community where Moolamba are. And we started attending weekly programs. We hired a Red Cross hall. The whole community. And some of them were disciples of Srila Srila Maharaj. Some of them were Srila Prabhupada disciples who had then gone and taken Shiksha from Srila Srila Maharaj. Some of them were devotees from ISKCON who'd never taken initiation. Others had taken initiation from certain personalities. It was a very interesting time. There was years where we were ostracized and then accepted, and then ostracized and then accepted, and it sort of depended on who was in leadership. And there were also years where the calendars were not in sync. And so, we'd have 2 Radhastamis and 2 Janmastamis, and rarely 2 Janmastamis, but it was one of those things that, of course, as a child who loves the festivity of it.
So did your parents take initiation in ISKCON before they were initiated by Govinda Maharaj?
Interesting. So my father, neither my mother did. My mother's birth name was Romana, and she changed it to Ramana when she met the devotees. My father was just still Bhakta Adrian. But my stepfather had been initiated. His name was Javier Hari, and he'd been initiated by Bhavananda, I believe. But at that stage, Bhavananda Hari, whatever, don't know the history, don't really want to know. And so when they took initiation of Govinda Maharaj, they took Harinam initiation in 91. My father didn't take Harinam initiation until late 95. And that sort of brings me to where I met my Gurudev, or had the association of my Gurudev. So actually, shortly after my parents took initiation, but before we moved, so mid 91, I was really frustrated because all the people that I'd met in this Sangha and Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Math, they all had devotional names, and I was still Jasmine, Jazz. And my brothers and sisters were Haridas and Baladev and Rani and Janaki Tulsi, and it's just like Nadia Chintamani, and here I am, Jasmine, and I was really frustrated. So I remember speaking to my mum about it, and we actually wrote a letter to Govinda Maharaj and asked him, I actually asked if I could be initiated, and I was not yet 8. And his response was, in paraphrasing, but his response was, I cannot give you initiation. However, I can give you the name Rasesvari. And that was really the fire. That was the first fire in my spiritual development, because when the name was explained to us, I remember my mom calling around trying to find out, what does Rasesvari mean? No one had ever heard it. And the name Rasesvari is Rasa Ishwari, Ishwari being the controller and Rasa being Raslila. And so it was explained to me at that age that actually all Ras is controlled by Srimati Radhika. And without Srimati Radhika, there's no servitude of Krishna. And actually Krishna's full relishment and enjoyment is under her control. So when I received the name Rasesvari Dasi, I was like, even as a 7-year-old, oh, it's just not this little boy and his brother and the cows. And it was like, oh, wow, there's this whole other realm. And that's how I came to my Gurudev later on, because in 1995, when my dad finally met Srila Govinda Maharaj, Bhaktisinoda Govinda Maharaj, it was his last time coming to Australia. And he left on New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. And on the 3rd of January, 1996, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj came for the first time to our community. And my dad literally received Harinam from his Guru Maharaj, who he'd been associating with all of these years. But finally he took Harinam. And then his Gurudev left his physical presence. He never saw his Gurudev again. And he took Shiksha from my Gurudev. And that was a long journey. That was 13 years of my dad harassing me. I remember one time I was about 14 or 15, maybe 16, in that, strange phase in Melbourne where he was very frustrated with me because I made him pick up from a party or who knows what. And he was so frustrated because he wanted me to take my Krishna consciousness more seriously. And he took me to this random house of someone I didn't know. And he said, I want you to meet someone. And I walk into this room and there's this woman, shaved head in white. And he says, this is Jadharani. She's the one who's painted all of these beautiful pictures. And I was like, teenage girl with all the, confusion. And he's saying, this is a Vaishnavi. Jadharani, Shamarani Didi. I ran away from that. And I remember being so angry with my dad. I literally ran away. I took my leave of Shamarani Didi very kindly, and I disappeared into the public transport network. And that was my relationship with, my Gurudev at the beginning, was constantly hearing about Narayan Maharaj, constantly hearing about his devotees, constantly having association of his devotees, constantly being invited to programs and running away, no surrender.
So let's talk a bit about that, because one of the things that I was fascinated by via our email exchange before this podcast today, was that you've been on this kind of journey through different mats and sanghas. So for a number of people that can be very, well, I find it intriguing. I find it intriguing because I'm interested in kind of diversity and sociology and people and all that kind of thing. Some people might find it intriguing and think, well, how can such a person go from mat to mat to mat? For me, it's just part of a journey. Other people might find it a bit confusing. You know, you in your early childhood years, you were associating kind of, I guess, within the establishment of ISKCON, disciples of Gaur Govinda Maharaj. Your parents then take shelter of Srila Govinda Maharaj, the Sri Chaitanya Saraswati, and then you in your own life finally accepted Srila Narayana Maharaj as your guru. So how, I mean, not kind of how did that journey happen, but tell us a bit about those experiences you were going through, because I mean, how old were you when you were initiated by Narayana Maharaj? What was it like, your first meeting with him, and all that kind of thing?
So it's interesting because you asked about the teenage years, and the teenage years were definitely had a huge impact on the timing of things in my spiritual journey. I never lacked sincerity. What was lacking in me was a place to feel safe to put my faith. And so when I met Srila Govinda Maharaj, I never met Gaur Govinda Maharaj, just to caveat that. The association with him was around his time with ISKCON, but I don't even know if my father met him. I don't think he did. When I met Srila Govinda Maharaj, I felt totally safe in a way I'd never felt in ISKCON. And it wasn't that I didn't feel safe in the temples, of course, but there was a lot of not very nice stuff happening in the background. And you know, we know all about, you know, with as little description as possible, we know about the things that have happened to the so-called Vaikuntha children. I'm lucky it didn't happen to me. However, I was exposed to the children, and there was a lot of bullying, a lot of anger and aggression. And there was also a lot of challenge because many devotees at that time left. You know, many devotees in the late 80s and the early 90s, they completely left Krishna consciousness for years and decades. Some have come back, some haven't come back. And so, like you said, for me, it was a journey. It wasn't a question of a lack of fidelity. Actually, it was more a question of, if I put myself in front of Krishna, he'll make sure I'm in the right place. I don't know what's going on. I don't trust any of these people who are being put in front of me because they don't inspire anything in my heart beyond what I'm already doing. And it had been heavily impressed upon me, and I have a completely different opinion now, but what had been heavily impressed upon me was chant your 4 rounds, chant your 8 rounds, chant your 16 rounds, be chanting 16 rounds for at least a year before you can take an initiation. You have to get the shelter first. Once you've got the shelter, then maybe you'll be considered, but only if you're doing this. And I did not like any of that. I still don't like any of that, to be honest. And it was also impressed upon me that, you know, Brahman initiation, Brahman initiation, I have a completely different relationship with that now as well. And sorry, I gesticulate. I'm just very expressive. So as a child, as a teenager, as a developing, you know, conscious being, I never lacked faith in Krishna consciousness, but I was frustrated and I was sick and tired of hearing Bhagavad Gita 101 and not seeing what was preached really being practiced in an authentic way that I could resonate with. So when I met Srila Govinda Maharaj had a completely different approach to anything I'd ever seen. He accepted everyone, clean shaved or not. In whatever condition you were, he accepted. You know, his condition for giving initiation, for giving Harinam initiation was not, you must be chanting 16 rounds, you must come up to this level. His was chant 4 rounds a day, and I will give you all the mercy I can. And that for me seemed much more harmonious. It seemed much more motivating, because when you asked earlier what was my experience growing up, and I responded discombobulating, I've constantly been confronted with this frustration that Krishna consciousness should be fun, it should be playful, it should be from the heart. Because why? Because that's how Krishna is. And we can't pretend to know him, but we can identify with that nature in human beings that we know. So when Krishna consciousness is presented as heavy and as disciplinarian, I've always rejected it. Because for me, I can't find Krishna in that kind of environment. Now, we can talk about Vaidhi Bhakti and Rupanuga Bhakti, and that's obviously things that relate to one another. And even if we talk about a Guru Parampara, even if we talk about Kishore Das Babaji Maharaj and Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj, even Haridas Thakur, disciplinarianism is an aspect that's well respected. But my nature is very much playful. And if you try to get mad at me for playing, I'll be more playful or I just run away. So how did I come to my Gurudev? First, Srila Govind Maharaj gave me this space to just be. It didn't matter what I wore. It didn't matter if I chanted or not. I could run up and sit on his lap or not, however I felt like it. And he had things like chocolate was not forbidden. So on Ekadasi one year, we all got white chocolate. All the kids got white chocolate on Ekadasi because it happened to be grain-free. And that was sweet. You know, that was delicious. That was wonderful. And not because it was forbidden, but because it was made to be not forbidden. It was accepted. And then coming to meet my Gurudev was a completely different thing. My Gurudev, he called me for years. I had dreams about him. And even at the height of my rebellion, if you will, my confusion and distancing myself from a lot of philosophy, but still attending programs, I would recite Srila Govinda Maharaj's pranam mantra whenever I was scared, but I would have these images of my Gurudev, even though I'd never laid eyes on him. I would have these impressions that there was this person protecting me in situations where I got myself into relative trouble. But in 2005, I left university. I hadn't finished, and I spent 10 months in Turkey under the protection of my aunt and uncle, who are atheists. And I missed out on Janmashtami and Radhastami, Balaram Purnima, and Gorpanim. And it wasn't until Gorpanim that I started to really hanker, and I was frustrated. So I tried to go to Sofia, to Bulgaria, to have the Association of Devotees, but I booked the wrong tickets, and I ended up not in Sofia, but in another town called Plovdiv. And I was in anguish, in physical pain, because I realized that this was my own arrangement. My lack of surrender had caused me to be, for the first time in my life, and as an adult, completely isolated on these important days. So when I came back to Australia, I immediately returned and got back into contact with the devotees, and did some preaching. I was a part of something called Gurukuli Bhajans, which they do at the Manor. They do Friday night bhajans in the Manor, and we started the same thing due to a dear friend of mine, Kalindi Henderson. She came back to Australia from the Manor, and she and I started amongst, a group of Friday night bhajans specifically aimed at Gurukulis, and we had the moniker Reconnecting the Disconnected. And even then, we'd do kirtan. Sometimes we'd had prasadam, and then we'd go nightclubbing, because I didn't want to alienate everyone. And I saw all these kids who do various sections of material life. I know girls who were selling themselves. I know boys who became chefs in 5-star meat restaurants, like eating meat. And it broke my heart. So I wanted to connect with them somehow. And I did in that way.
These were kind of ex-Gurukulis, children who were raised in the Hare Krishna movement in Australia.
Yeah, ex-Gurukulis, exactly, who'd whether they've been to school in Mayapur or Vrindavan or Australia, who'd, left Krishna consciousness because of the things that had happened to them or that they'd seen. And it broke my heart. So I'm still in contact with a lot of them. And that was what brought me to my Gurudev, because through that I attracted youth from my Gurudev Sangha, because they wanted to be a part of something youthful, something that was more about Nam Sankirtan and less about Tattva, and more about, can we just connect with each other the way we do as did as innocent children? Can we approach these things without guilt? Can we just hug each other without, thinking, oh my God, he's a Majuji, he's a Prabhu? Because that was horrible as a child. That was really horrible. This artificial physical renunciation was put on us that was just really, really challenging. So I met my god sister, Chandramukhi. Her mother was mother and father Prabhupada disciple, her stepfather, Srila Sridhar Maharaj disciple. And her parents, her sister and her parents hosted my Gurudev the first time that he arrived in Australia in 1996. And I remember her from high school. And she and others started coming to the Friday night bhajans. They didn't go clubbing. I just want to add that caveat. It was me and the other, not so disciplined, who went clubbing. And Chandramukhi, my sister, actually, the Maha Abhishek was coming up in Mayapur, and I'd never been to India. And my sister had a 2-year-old boy, and she didn't want to go to India alone, and she'd arranged accommodation, and she wanted to go to the Maha Abhishek, and she asked me to go. So I said, okay. I took off time work, booked tickets, and then my sister cancelled, and I happened to be on the same flight with Chandramukhi. So diligent, I checked with all of my god aunties and uncles from the various sanghas as to who I could stay with and who I could see. And I was supposed to meet with I guess a god brother from Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat. He was supposed to take me to meet Govinda Maharaj and have Govinda Maharaj's darshan, and it didn't happen. So I arrived in Calcutta, and he didn't answer any of my texts. I'd been speaking to him in Singapore a few hours before, and he didn't answer anything. And Chandramukhi said, I can't leave you here in Calcutta on your own. And I was like, no, don't leave me. So I arrived in Navadvip. And she was like, I'll take you wherever you want to go, but just tell me, where do you want to go? And I was like, well, there's no one that I know at Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat yet. The other contacts that I've been writing at Mayapur ISKCON had not been answering. I was like, I guess I just have to stay here. And a day before, this was a day before Nityananda Trayodasi, and we happened to be then invited to take parikrama of Ekachakra. And I didn't know anything about it. I was like, okay, sure, I'm down for anything. So I went to Ekachakra. That was just amazing. And then Chandramukhi said, I have to go and see my Gurudev now. Do you want to come with him if you come with me and just meet him? And I said, okay, sure, why not? And she sat very close to him. He was sort of leaned out a little bit, like you see Mahavishnu leaned out, and he was sort of leaned out, and I touched his feet, and then I caught his eye, and he told me not to with his eyes. And she was sitting a little bit closer to him, and she said, Gurudev, I brought you a flower. I brought you a jasmine flower. And this was something that my Gurudev asked all of his disciples, was, when you come next time, bring me more flowers. Meaning, bring me more people that I can, preach to. And I was like, oh, no. And he said, oh, very nice. And she said, oh, she's singing and preaching, because I'd been organizing these kirtan nights. And Gurudev, he sat up, and he, with his hand 3 times, he looked me in the eyes, he's thrown 3 times like this. Very nice. You should sing and preach like Chandramukhi. And ignorant and stupid as I was, no, I don't sing, I don't preach. Because I was going night clubbing afterwards. I was rascal. But but that set a chain in motion, and I was nominated for initiation. I was still rebelling against that. And the Ekadasi before Gurpanima was in my mind, like, oh God, no, how? And my greatest concern was, I don't want another name. And I've only met a couple of Rasesvaris since, actually. At that time, I didn't know anyone. And I just didn't want to know the name, and I was panicked. And I thought, but if I'm going to take initiation, then I have to be fully surrendered, but I can't surrender my name, and I don't know what to do about it. And so I just mentaled out. And I was very lucky that a Gurukuli friend of mine, he was taking me back and forth from Mayapur because he didn't want me to go on my own, and I was still trying to meet all the aunties and uncles I was supposed to meet. And he said to me, just put it out of your mind, just sleep on it. And the next morning I woke up, I was looking at the calendar, talking about Holi being Gurpanim, and we were all arranging what we would be doing that day. This is 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, preparing to go to Mangalarti. And I said, oh, well, I don't have to worry about Holi. I'll be at the temple anyway, because I have to be there for initiation. And then I suddenly was like, okay, I do want this. I am ready for this. This is going to happen. So that's how I met my Gurudev.
In which year was this?
This was 2009.
2009. So you, in one sense, were one of the last.
So I managed to avoid my Gurudev for 13 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Srila Narayana Maharaj left the planet. That's such a Hare Krishna term, isn't it? Left the planet.
Left the planet.
Left this world, left our physical vision. End of 2010, was it?
Yeah, 29th of December 2010.
Yeah. So in the grand scheme, you were one of the last. I'm sure Narayana Maharaj initiated many others in 2010, but you were towards the end. Yeah. That's kind of, so at that point you were 24, 23.
Yeah. 24, turning 25. Yeah.
24. I think you and I were born in the same year. I've tried to work it out, but
I'm 84.
I'm 84 as well. Not 84 years old. I was born in 84, but I'm in the academic year above you. I'm July 84.
I'm August 84, but I started a year early in Australia. January.
I got confused because you said you left university in 2005, which is when I left, and I thought, my goodness, something's going wrong in Australia.
No. So I had a break in my university. That's why you got confused. So I started in 2001. I did 2001, 2002. 2002. I turned 18 in the August. So 2002, 2003, I did uni. Yeah. I left, and then I returned to a different university in 2006.
Okay.
After my stint in 2005 in Turkey, where Krishna revealed to me that I was the most nonsense person on the planet. I couldn't get association. He sent me to a completely different city when I sincerely wanted devotee association. So I started to knuckle down. But yeah, I met my Gurudev in 2009. And incidentally, after that trip, just to sort of talk about this harmony and disharmony that you're particularly alluding to, that you're really focused on. I had been given from all denominations, let's say, heavy warnings, including from my own family just prior to leaving, how I should behave and what would be acceptable, and I shouldn't take association from that personality or this personality. And I'm not interested in naming names, it's just to speak to the controversy at the time. And I was so challenged that actually I received Harinam in the morning on Gurpanim, March 2009. And by the evening, I was actually at Sri Chaitanya Saraswati Mat, still trying to get the association of, my former godbrothers. I felt like they were my god family. And I was heavily, heavily rejected by someone whom my father had actually brought to Krishna Consciousness. And I was distraught. Absolutely distraught. And I was walking between that and my Gurudev's temple, it's only separated by a small gully. And I happened to have a bhajan book in my hand, and I opened it up to Vaishnava K. And at the time, that was my only discipline. When I was confused, take any book, give my question to the book, open the page, and see what Krishna would reveal. And I read the 5th stanza of Vaishnava K, and it was describing, in this translation, it was describing that how can you understand who is a personality, who is a Vaishnava of good caliber. And it was that the translation explained, you know it by who is associating with them. And I realized that everyone around me was Gurudev disciples, so I was where I should be. But I was still challenged. So on the way home to the airport, I was flying with other God brothers and sisters, and I asked them if we could please stop at Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt in Kolkata, and we did. And when I arrived there, I happened to meet someone who I'd only met through Facebook. And he recognized me immediately. And he said, "You're here to see Gurudev?" And I said, "Yeah." And he took me straight up. And at the time, Srila Govinda Maharaj hadn't been giving any more darshans. It was relatively late in the evening, maybe 7:38 already. And his primary sevak had just come out and said, "Okay, everything done for the night." And I had just arrived, like fully passionate. And there came from inside came a voice, "Let her in." So I went in, and this is the point at which nobody will ever change my impression of how to find harmony within the Vaishnavas. And I walked in. I paid my obeisances at the door, and then I walked into him, and I just dropped to my knees in front of him, and I have my hands on my knees. And he looked exactly as he had before, except he was in like a motorized buggy, because he'd had a back surgery with rods and all sorts of things in it. And I explained who I was, referring to my parents, because I figured with the material intellect, that's how he would identify me. And he gave me blessings, and I said to him, "You know, everybody's telling me that I shouldn't have done what I did, but I didn't have a choice. I came to see you, and I couldn't see you. And the only place that I could see was there. The only person to give me any kind of shelter was him. And all of these people in your side and his side are telling me that I'm now no longer allowed to speak to my family, to my parents, to people I've known my entire life, to the only family I truly believe in." And I said to him, "If you instruct me this, I will do it, but it's asking me to cut off my own arm. So if that's your instruction, you have to tell me how, because I can't do that. I don't know how to cut off my own arm." And he had tears in his eyes, and he pushed his hand again, blessings. And he said, "My daughter, you don't need to worry about anything they have to say. They don't know your heart. I know your heart. And you're exactly where you should be. So go, be peaceful, and chant Hare Krishna." So didn't reconcile everything. There were still times later on where people came and were very, very, very challenging towards me, because I refused to reject anyone, because I felt their protection my whole life. Who did I call when I was scared, when I was walking the streets after nightclubbing in Melbourne trying to get home? I was singing Srila Govinda Maharaj's pranam mantras. But when I went to India, finally feeling ready to, you know, to start on this spiritual pathway in a sincere manner, I couldn't see him. So, you know, in my understanding, he was looking after me for the period of time. And subsequently, I was under the protection of my Gurudev. And it's my belief that anybody who is still stuck in the mindset of, you know, ISKCON this or Gaudiya that, this month this, or this month that. Actually, it's just the nature of a child. The nature of the child is to think that his parent is better than everyone else's parent at that time. But if you can find safety with aunties and uncles, then you've really developed a different kind of trust. So I don't see different sanghas. I don't. Because I went to Berlin in April this year, and in one temple there was an installation of Srila Prabhupada's Murti, and I didn't know them, but a few of my godbrothers were there, and I was invited to sing, and I sang Jai Radha Madhava with all sincerity to Srila Prabhupada, because without him, I would not be on this journey in this way. But I can't say that my faith in him should mean I should have less faith in any other person, because I have no capacity to protect myself. I'm the most nonsense, going and singing bhajans, going and drinking, partying until all hours of the night. That was my entire teenage years until I met my Gurudev. So I can't. It's not, that would be like asking a mother to choose its own child, which child it prefers. I can't do that.
In my naivety years ago, I just thought it was kind of ISKCON against the world, or it was kind of ISKCON versus the Gaudiya Mat. I mean, that's a whole nother issue around the Gaudiya Mat. What do we mean by the Gaudiya Mat? But I didn't realize till a couple of years ago, there's also this kind of tension between the Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mat and the Narayana Maharaj Sangha. And I don't fully understand. It's based on something that happened in the 1960s or something, which to me, from a very kind of material world point of view, it's such a small issue from the past. I probably just upset a lot of people by saying it's a small issue, but in the grand scheme of things, I think we have to learn to get on a lot more to be better at being supportive of one another. I think the Christians, for all of their faults, the Christians are better at preaching and practicing forgiveness and moving on. And we as Vaishnavas,
Yeah, I agree.
need to be a lot better at that. You know, the Hare Krishna movement is very small on a global level, and we shouldn't waste time arguing with each other about whose guru someone is or whatever. Let's just get on with sharing the teachings of Krishna consciousness with Western people, with any people around the world. That's kind of my kind of
I think
view.
That's a really important aspect, because actually the Guru principle and Guru Nishta on the stages of bhakti is so incredibly important. But the thing is, if we're thinking only in reference to our Diksha Guru, we're missing the entire Guru principle. And actually, the power of Guru is in his Vapu, in his Vani. It's in his instructions, it's in his words, but it's also in the Guru principle. And if we don't understand, the Guru principle is Akhanda Guru Tattva, Nityananda Prabhu. Is the embodiment of the Guru principle. Not Balaram, not Sri Baladev. Because why? Because the difference is that Balaram Prabhu becomes angry. Our court, he has this red eyes is the nature of Balaram Prabhu. If anyone does anything against Krishna. Nityananda Prabhu is exactly the opposite. Actually, he became angry at Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And this, if we don't understand Akhanda Guru Tattva, Nityananda Prabhu, Akroda Paramananda Nityananda Rad, we don't understand that the only shelter from Guru is a Guru who's not angry. We haven't understood Nityananda Tattva, we haven't understood Guru Tattva. So this is one of the things that in some of the more controversial conversations one can have about the Hare Krishna movement since Srila Prabhupada left, is, who is a bona fide guru? And actually, you can still have so-called unbona fide guru and make progress. Because your faith should be in the process. Your faith should be in the Guru principle. Your faith should be, my Gurudev can show me anywhere that I am, that I've taken a wrong step, and in a loving way guide me. And if I'm not responding into a loving way, give me a little bit of a slap. And that's the guru principle. And if we're constantly thinking this person and that person are not advancing along this, it's not my job to parent anybody else's children but my children. So it's not it's my Gurudev's job to teach me. But it's my relationship with him that allows that I can be taught, and his relationship with me. And if I go other places and think, no, you can't teach me because my Gurudev said this, then actually, if my Gurudev were there, he'd slap me, kick me even. He did that. He did that. Not to me, but to others.
Can we talk a bit about today? I mean, not literally today, but what you're doing in your life now. So we haven't mentioned this, or I haven't mentioned this on the podcast. You're in Germany. You're not in Australia or Turkey. You're in Germany. It's 2023. I think it's still 2023. You've been a disciple, an initiated disciple under Raya Maharaj for what, 14 years, which is a long time. You're a busy woman. You've told me before this podcast, you're a single mom, you're self-employed, you're homeschooling your children, which I think is you need an award or a trophy for just doing that. I guess my first question is, how do you fit it all in, and how did your journey take you to 2023 in Germany, homeschooling your children?
Okay. So in 2009, I took initiation from my Gurudev. Shortly after that, I spent 4 months traveling, I don't know how many countries in Europe, preaching for my Gurudev. I can't tell you which countries and how. It's too far in my memory.
You've been to the UK, I guess.
Yeah. So we went from Australia to Malaysia, Malaysia to UK to Italy, Italy to France, France to Germany, 3 cities in Germany, Germany to Holland, Holland to the UK. So London, Birmingham, places in Wales, Dublin, Belfast, and then back to London, and then to Turkey, to Istanbul and to Izmir. And then from Turkey, I then went to India for my first Rajmandal Parikrama. And that was in 2009 still. And then we went back to Australia, and I went back to my job. I'm a teacher. I'm a language teacher, which is why I trust myself to teach my children. I'm also, my sister's a teacher. My stepsister is a teacher's aide. My aunt is a teacher on an international circuit for the last 30 years.
Wow.
And my step-grandmother is a child psychologist. So I have deep impressions from really good teachers in my life, which is why I made the decision, or why I had the desire to homeschool my children. And it was just, actually Corona was the thing that made that happen, because their father was not really interested in the idea, but he saw in the first Corona closure how the children were uplifted from just being at home, and that they were both doing better academically. So that's how that works. That said, it's a little complicated because I don't feed them. It means I'm not here, learn this, here, learn this, here, learn this. I did a lot of research over a lot of years looking at different curriculums. I found essentially a self-learning curriculum of 12 years, created by an American single father who was widowed when his youngest child was 18 months old. He was a father of 6. And all of his 6 children went on to do a master's or PhD in the sciences. And so he's laid out this fantastic program. It's very Christian, but I don't see that as a problem, because we study comparative religion anyway. So my children, they have essentially a 12-year curriculum that they're just progressing on. Sometimes I supplement with German books so that we retain the German. Sometimes we take 6 weeks off or 8 weeks off or 10 weeks off, because I don't see that as stagnation. I see they're learning in other areas and they come back to it hard. And the winters being so challenging as they are here, we really prefer to get as much time outside during the summers. But as to being busy, I do my teaching online. Very often So in winter, my classes are usually early in the morning, between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m.
Wow.
In summer, I tend to have a couple in the morning and a couple in the evening. It just is how it works with the students that I get. So I teach Australians and Americans and some other nationalities, German, actually.
You teach them German?
I teach them German, yeah.
So you obviously speak German. I mean, that's a silly question. You're fluent at German, in German.
Yeah, my German is okay. I learned it here. I didn't learn it as a child.
Okay.
But I'm a language teacher, so I understand the basics of language teaching, and and I have compassion for people who have blockages. That's always been my nature. Is if someone has a blockage about something, I want to help them figure it out, and that's where I'm a good teacher, I guess. But yeah, so our day-to-day is not really routine in any way, apart from I do my classes and the kids sort of move around my classes. They've got a lot more physical responsibility than other kids their age, but at the same time, I feel like children of this generation don't have enough physical responsibility. And it's been challenging, especially since Corona, because we had a local temple, and coming into the Corona period, so in 2019, the local leadership made the decision, also a controversial decision, but with donations, they bought a property, and it's 2 hours away. And at the time, I made a commitment to the community that I would maintain the temple operation for 1 year. And I said, I'll do it for 1 year, but if the rest of the community doesn't pull together, I can't live in a temple as a single mom. In 2019, I had a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old. And we were open 7 days a week, morning program starting at 5 a.m. So I was up at 4, and we weren't closing until 10 p.m. And that was just incredibly challenging. There were lots of people who participated, but I guess through Krishna's mercy and my own prayer, that actually all kind of came to an end without me being at fault, in the sense that the building was condemned in June 2020. And I really separated myself from a lot of people at that point in time, because I needed to give my energy to my children exclusively. They didn't, I mean, karmically, whatever you want to think, but I called these children into my life. It was a conscious decision to have both of them. And my loyalty to my Gurudev is expressed in loyalty to them. Because as I've witnessed my whole life long, and there's a lot to be said, obviously, in every generation of Vaishnavas, even if you talk about Bali Maharaj, even if you talk about Hiranyakashipu and Prahlad Maharaj, it's demon Vaishnava, demon Vaishnava, demon Vaishnava. That's okay. But that's tattva, and that's to give us an indication of how things can be. But for me, the idea of having children who would then leave Krishna consciousness is just heartbreaking. So I'm doing everything I can to support their immediate needs in every way. And I see that as my service to my Gurudev. So we haven't had a lot of local connection the last few years.
And how do you feel about that? I mean, has it been a positive experience, a negative, or a bit of both?
I mean, definitely all-encompassing, positive and negative. But at the same time, it was something that I called for. My whole life long, I've had a lot of compassion, as I've spoken to you about, a lot of compassion for people who were heavily involved in Krishna consciousness and then appeared to leave. And that didn't stop when I came here. There are great personalities in Berlin who, were strong brahmacharis who then just left and nobody's heard from them again. And that always challenged me. So I kind of was fascinated to a point of having to be confronted with it myself. Like, why do you isolate completely from this pathway? And for me, it was, sorrow. It's all well and good to say that separation is the highest mood. I haven't stopped grieving a day since my Gurudev left. Not one day, and I don't think I ever will. And a lot of it is selfish and stupid, because actually it comes from knowing I could have had more time with him had I surrendered earlier. At the same time, everything can be used to feed to feed the spiritual journey. So, the question being, I don't lament about what's happened. I recognize where my decision making has taken us to this point, and I see that this has allowed my children to develop their own internal spiritual fortitude. So a few months ago, the Kirtaniyas were here at a festival local to us, and I know them since, before they began the band, but they haven't necessarily seen my kids. And my son, they were singing Jai Gurudev, and my son just started crying. And he just buried himself in me, and I asked him what it was, and he said, I need this, Mum. We need this, Mum. We need more of this. And I recognized, okay, I've been running away in so many aspects out of, I don't know why exactly. I'm good at running.
How old is, so your son is what, 13, 14 now?
No. So my son is 9 and my daughter is 11. My son,
he sounds very intelligent for a 9-year-old to understand what he's feeling. I mean, I don't have kids, so I don't really understand how they develop in that way, but he seems to be very intelligent to know what he needs spiritually, philosophically, or socially, even at the age of 9.
I think he's been very, very fortunate that he's had the association of great Vaishnavas. And even though the last couple of years we haven't had that many, he's been given the association of multiple sanghas, of Bhaktivedanta Ban Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Shuddha Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Madha Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Paramhamsa Maharaj. These are all disciples of my Gurudev, but many more. Kishori and Sudevi, Shamarani Didi. Shamarani Didi has great affection for both my children. And I've encouraged it. My method of serving them is to see what was lacking for the kids in my peer group that had them run away, and I try to provide that for my children. So yeah, he is quite emotionally intelligent. He is encouraged to speak his mind. He's encouraged to make mistakes and have the space to reflect on that, and also to practice genuine humility. So it's just from the association of everyone that I've had association with here. It hasn't been an easy journey, but it's been a journey that has been humbling for me. And my kids, they're not mine. I wanted them. I wanted this experience, but I don't see them as something I should take pride in. But I still should be shameful of what I'm not doing properly. And that shame thing is a hard thing to deal with, because it's a very quintessential aspect to the Vedic culture, but it's challenging because it's very often misrepresented in a neo-Christian manner. So I don't mean shame in the sense of go and beat yourself. I mean shame in the sense of reflect and seek guidance, reflect and find the humble position. So my kids still have a lot more association than I do. Their dad frequently takes them to different temples. I don't have a car, and I'm just busy doing the day-to-day stuff, trying to find a connection with my Japamala again, trying to, repair the grievances that I have with myself and that I've had with other people. Trying to get forgiveness for the things that I've done wrong. So yeah, that's sort of
well, I really appreciate your honesty, and I really appreciate you just being very open about so many things. I think it's important for our own kind of spiritual journeys, our spiritual progress, our own relationship with the Lord, with those around us, with our gurus, within our sampradayas, to just be open and honest. We all fail at things. We're all, I hate this word, we're all sinners. We all do things wrong. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. And, I love it when I meet devotees who are just willing to be open and honest. Yeah.
See, this is something that I it's such a theme, and maybe another time in the future we can talk about this theme. But this particular theme, I'll try and make it into a succinct statement. I was speaking to a god brother recently, and I said to him directly, I think there's something missing in your bhajan, because what you've described to me now shows me a critical deficit in self-confidence. Because if we truly understand Krishna consciousness, we understand, although we are part and parcel, we are singularly unique. And all too often we want to focus on the sins and the bad qualities, but the reality is the only personality who is complete is Sri Krishna, and the only personality who is complete in servitude is Srimati Radharani. Every single other person has levels of completeness. They are singularly complete within themselves, but they are not as complete as the supreme whole. So my genuine focus is to try and see people and see myself as I have something unique to offer to Krishna. If I'm constantly trying to compare myself, how is my singing to that person? How is my this to that person? How is my this to that person? If I'm constantly trying to do that, I'm missing the point, in the sense that Krishna is the one who's relishing me. And if I look at myself in the mirror and I've put on this and that and this and that, he might not be even interested in that. And if I'm taking pride in what I think he's looking at me for, I miss the point. At the same time, if I'm so self-depreciating that I find myself having no value, then I'm also missing the point. It's not my duty to decide how I should be relished. Krishna does that. That's his duty. It's my duty to be sincere. And it's not to say that I'm always sincere. You know, I'm very, very good at hiding the truth from myself. I remember one time Srimati Shamarani Didi, she's just the most amazing, soft, but empowered hammer. And I remember one time she asked me what I was planning to do. She has this thing about asking about plans. It's one of the things she likes to do. And she asked what I was planning to do. And I said, you know, I just really think the youth need more encouragement on understanding how to balance material and spiritual life. And in my mind, I was thinking, you know, material life, you do that, and spiritual life, you do this, and you bridge the gap between the two. What I've come to understand is, if your material life isn't your spiritual life, and your spiritual life isn't your material life, then you're duplicitous. And that was all through Shamarani Didi asking me, what are you planning? And me, you know, I've heard my own words so often about this balancing material and spiritual life. And this is what I'm trying to also give my children the protection and the shelter of strengthening in themselves the value of their Krishna consciousness. So they don't do it whether I'm there or not. So they do it if someone's looking or not. And so they recognize love is the thing that Krishna is interested in experiencing. Whatever they do with love, he will relish. And whatever they do in any other mood will incur a repercussion of some kind. If it's a mood towards themselves, a mood towards Krishna, a mood towards anybody else. And, you know, I'm lucky. I mean, most parents will say this, their children are their teachers, but my children, wow, they keep me honest. They really keep me honest, and I'm grateful.
I really appreciate your kind of humility, or the way you're expressing humility, your honesty, and you know, we've had a fantastic conversation today, and we can both conclude that Krishna consciousness isn't always an easy road to travel on.
No.
You know, we are in this life we're human beings, we're appearing as human beings in this life, and life isn't an easy journey. We make mistakes, there are temptations here and there, and things happen, and life is what it is. That doesn't mean you should let people walk all over you. It doesn't mean you should tolerate absolutely anything or anything. And I remember having a conversation with a devotee a couple of years ago. It was about humility, and their view very much was that you should accept anything that happens to you. And I said something like, yes, but don't let people walk over you. It's good to be humble and be submissive and be really kind of, the servant of the servant of the servant. But don't let people walk all over you and humiliate you and abuse you and bully you. Everything isn't acceptable. And it was an interesting conversation.
I think on that particular thread of not letting people walk all over you, I think there's also a victim mentality involved with guilt within our movement. This shame and guilt, then cultivating this victim mentality. And I've definitely been prone to it of, I haven't been doing this and this and this properly, how I should be. I know I should be what I should be. And consequently, when something I perceive as negative comes, I feel like I deserve it and therefore I should accept it. And I think there are lots of people who I believe have much more faith than I do. And I see it in the way that their lives, on the whole, are more joyous. And I see those people experiencing Krishna consciousness with, the same, less, more perceived negative influences, but they're joyful. And I'm in this mood of feeling sorry for myself. And this is where I try to remember, one, I'm the tool. Gurudev is the master. But if I keep hurting him, he can't use me properly. I keep hurting him when I say, I'm not a hammer. And he says, I need a hammer. You're a hammer. And I say, I'm not a hammer. I'm a crap hammer. I'd be a better file, which is how we operate. And it's very childish. And I see this having children. I see this every day. And at the same time, I really appreciate what you're doing, because I feel like these kind of dialogues have to happen more. And, we've talked about various things. One of the things that I've kind of alluded to, but haven't really succinctly said, is the greatest challenge in my spiritual development has been a lack of peerdom. I've very often had very high class association, and I've had the association of people who know very little about Krishna consciousness and are just starting on their journey. But in my life, it's a constant, either my peers are very, very, very far away, or I just don't have them. And I feel a lot of that is because for years, this kind of candid conversation and sharing was discouraged and had to be hidden. And, I don't know how your experience was, but that was definitely my experience. I remember aunties having garlic pills because of some, and telling each other secrets. Oh, I'm, does my breast smell? I'm taking garlic pills for my health because of this and that. And I was just like, man, it's not the same as going out and eating a cow.
Yeah. Everything's relative, isn't it? My experience is, well, I wasn't raised a devotee. I wasn't raised a Hare Krishna. I joined the Hare Krishnas around the age of 20, which was almost 20 years ago. So I was raised in a meat-eating family, and my parents were quite liberal. I was allowed to drink alcohol from the age of 14. I was allowed to go clubbing at the age of 16. My mum just said, "Oh, be safe." So I'm from a kind of different different background to some extent. I try and see things much more relative. I remember I went home and I told my mum I joined the Hare Krishnas and blah, 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 and this was my diet. And she didn't mind, actually, because we were allowed to make our own decisions. and as long as you're happy, it doesn't matter, as long as you're happy, and have some money in the bank if possible, don't come and ask for money. And she thought the whole onion and garlic thing was just in my head. Oh, that's silly. Why don't you eat onion and garlic? It's wonderful. You can put it in so many foods. But now, without even asking, if I go to my mum's and visit her, she'll make me something to eat, which is in a separate plate. She's separate utensils, and she doesn't put onion and garlic in it. And I haven't asked her to do any of that. She's done it out of love for me because I'm her son. She cares for me. I guess it's like, I mean, I don't like football, but if I joined the local football team and started playing football, she might come and watch me to support her son. So I guess I had just kind of a different type of background, really. And I don't understand. I find it difficult to understand this whole hiding things and not talking to people. I'm living in a society where it's a democracy. I can be any religion I want. I can vote for anyone I want. I can be in love with anyone I want as long as it's consensual. I'm allowed to do those things, but I'm not allowed to talk to someone from a different mat. It's crazy.
Good on you.
It's just crazy. It's kind of like, so I can go and do interfaith stuff with the Muslims who eat meat, who maybe worship some impersonal aspect of the divine, but I can't talk to the devotees down the road who chant the same mantra, who wear the same clothes, who read the same scriptures, who follow the same diet. I just find it very weird. So my background's kind of quite different anyway, and I came to Krishna consciousness through the academic route. I was studying religions at university. And so we didn't study Krishna consciousness, we studied ISKCON. And I learned about ISKCON in the same month that I learned about the Church of Scientology, the Moonies, the Mormons, and the Raelian movement, which I think they're not German, they're from France. They're kind of the UFO cult. So for me, I always saw ISKCON as a bit cultish anyway. And now I ended up joining, which was kind of quite comical. There was a thread. You asked me a question, and I went off on this tangent, and I forgot what it was, but it was about my experiences. I find a lot of things just quite comical. I've been told by people in ISKCON I shouldn't talk to this person, talk to that person. Well, I'll talk to who I want to, because I'm allowed to.
It's interesting. It's interesting because, when I spoke to you about the very beginning, just at the time that I was meeting my Gurudev and how much controversy there was at the time, there were controversy on all sides, and the particular bad blood, if you will, between Sri Chaitanya Saraswat Mutt and my Gurudev's Mutt, it's not something that I know deeply about. I have some vague details, and I really don't care about it because, in my perspective, as in yours, it was from the 60s, and it was something that was just carried on like a childish feud. What I've also understood after being in the presence of a Mahabhagavat on a few times, what I've also understood is that one thing that we don't understand about Vaishnava Aparad, or one thing that's rarely properly explained, is how Vaishnava Aparad operates. And the true highest understanding is that a Vaishnava, you cannot make Aparad against a Vaishnava. People who would take offense will be his disciples. But that's because they are still nuanced on their development. But a Mahabhagavat, he will never take offense at your ignorance. Even if you become aggressive towards him or her, he will not be offended, because the Mahabhagavats come to us in the line of Srimati Radharani specifically to help us out of this world. So it will go completely against their agenda to engage in being offended. They don't get offended. They may appear that way in certain ways, but the people who get offended, it's like the child trying to defend the parent. You're right. You're this big. You can't defend any of me. No, you can't. You don't need to either. So when we understand Aparad in that perspective, we also need to understand there is a different kind of Aparad. And this is, again, I don't have necessarily the right words and terminology for this. You're far more academically qualified than I am, but there's a different kind of Aparad, and this is just something that I've heard described in many different ways, and that is, there's a kind of Aparad where your behavior turns a person negatively towards Krishna consciousness in any way. And it's almost like you've become a device that prevents someone from coming closer to Krishna. And at some point they may. But that is the aparad that actually is described in our bhajans. That is the aparad that we should be really careful of. And unfortunately, it's the one that we're most susceptible to, because we think, oh, now I know how to do this, I'm going to do it right. Oh, now I can pay Charanamrita. You're not wearing your tilak in the right place. You're not wearing 3 strands of kantimala. Oh, you've got a colored bead. If I'm constantly looking at everybody else, the Germans have a beautiful expression. They say, look at the edge of your own plate. If you're not looking at the edge of your own plate, then you don't know whether you're being tidy while you're eating. You're constantly looking at everybody else's, then you're making a mess. And so I'm we spoke about the length of time that I've been here, and there's been a lot of challenges being here, especially because I grew up in this divine, amazing, wonderful, beautiful community. The community in Australia is one of the most strong. We've got a Gurukul in Australia that is world standard, where non-devotees are sending their kids to the Gurukul because the standard of education is so high. They got awarded 3rd in the state a few years ago. And I'm here and I have, a different situation. So sometimes I feel really like, not envious, but like wary and understanding of what I could be in if I were there. But being in Germany has afforded me a psychological perception that I could never have gotten anywhere else. And it's things like, look at your own plate. And I couldn't understand hypocrisy until I understood that. I didn't understand it. I saw it constantly. And I was engaged in it constantly. But, for whatever reason, I'm here. I'm teaching German. I've got my kids here. They're learning German. We have, distant Sangha and, some things we still have to deal with in a local community in, time to come. And I'm just really grateful to be a part of this with you. I'm grateful that you're endeavoring like this. I'm grateful that when I have conversations on this kind of exchange level with people, whether in a forum like this or whether just one-to-one, I'm grateful that I feel the presence of my Guru Parampara. I feel the presence of Srila Prabhupada. I feel the presence of my Gurudev. I feel the presence of Srila Govinda Maharaj or Srila Gokul Govinda Maharaj. And I'm, I don't see them as ever being the kind of people who would get into a room and fight with one another, except to fight for maybe, well, Krishna's better than Radhika and Radhika's better than Krishna, which is a bona fide argument to have, So, yeah, that's just bare, open-hearted me.
Rasesvari, it's been wonderful to chat to you today. We've been chatting for an hour and a half, believe it or not. It's been a fantastic conversation. And there's 2 things I want to finish with before we do finish. The first one is I've looked up the definition of discombobulate, because you mentioned that an hour and a half ago. I thought, wow, there's a word that I've not heard about in a long time. So discombobulate, it says on Google, it means confused and disconcerted. And then the example is, he is looking a little pained and discombobulated.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was I going to say it? And then I was like, I am going to say it because we have to be open and honest. A couple of years ago, I went to a Sri Chaitanya Saraswati temple in the UK, and I was helping and I was volunteering, and I went into the kitchen. I opened the cupboard and I saw some tea and coffee. And I thought, thank goodness these guys are normal. I wanted to end on that comical note. Hopefully no one's offended by that, but I thought, my goodness, these guys are normal. There's some coffee in the cupboard. I really fancy a coffee after the day I've had.
I think that's really important. I in my notes preparing for this today, you wrote, you're a busy woman, a single mom, self-employed, homeschooling your children. How do you manage to fit it all in? And I wrote, I don't fit it all in, number 1. Number 2, coffee, because I exist without protection. My children, I'm the protector, and this is not a natural situation to be in. It is our karma. So yeah, I drink coffee. It's not a pleasurable experience for me, and it's definitely not something that that I say other people should do. But I'm not going to banish you for doing it, because For example, this year we didn't attend any Janmashtami program because my children have a stomach flu. So I've changed the sheets 5 times in 3 days. I've been literally up to my eyeballs in bodily fluids. That was my Janmashtami. And
one to remember.
actually, their father, I was here with my son. He took my daughter the night before Janmashtami. He took her to the temple. At 2 o'clock in the morning, she started. He packed her in the car by 7 and had her here to me by 9 because he didn't want to risk infecting everybody else at the mutt. So, you have to surrender to these things. And my position is, if you constantly try to do everything, you do nothing well. So I don't try to do everything. I do what I can, when I can, how I can. And I hope that at least my children will have that built into them, because I think that a mood like that is more facilitating to avoiding hypocrisy.
And I'm sure you'll do a fantastic job, and I'm sure you are doing a fantastic job. Please raise them as normal as possible. We want them to be normal adults, if such a thing exists. That they've been raised in some weird cult or something. So I think I'm going to say goodbye to the viewers and listeners at home. You and I can have a brief debrief after. We're having a heat wave in the UK, so after this, I need to go. I think you're having a heat wave in Germany as well at the moment.
I can feel it too. I actually had a jumper on, and I've had to take my jumper off.
It's amazing. It's quite unbelievable. So a big thank you to Rasesvari for being our 80th guest on this podcast. I cannot believe, I say it all the time, I cannot believe we've made it to 80, and we've got a string of guests coming up over the next couple of weeks, which means that we will probably reach our 100th episode within the next 5 to 6 weeks, which is quite something. And I appreciate you for being our guest this week, and your candidness, your openness, your honesty. And I think it's very good. It would be very good for a lot of devotees to hear this podcast, so they can appreciate what honesty sounds like in the Hare Krishna movement. It's good to be honest about so many things. So if you're watching this on YouTube, please do put a constructive comment, like it. Please do hit the subscribe button so you can hear about future podcasts and video. Video is an old-fashioned word, isn't it? Video updates. I mean, you don't get videos anymore, VHS. And if you're watching this on Facebook, please do follow or like the Hare Krishna Project page. And also do check out our new website, the harekrishnaproject.org.uk. We can hear about more news about what we're doing. So until next week, we'll see you all soon. Thank you. Hare Krishna.